Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to episode 6 of The Bronco Well, refilling your bucket so you can pour into others. I'm your podcast host, Molly Veldier. I'm an occupational therapy capstone student from Western Michigan University. I've had the blessing of working with a lot of amazing families in pediatrics, and it has always just been a mission of mine to ensure that the caregivers are also cared for. I'm completing this capstone under the guidance of Dr. Michelle Suarez, Associate Professor of Occupational Therapy and the Resiliency Center Director at Unified Clinics, located on Western Michigan University's Kalamazoo campus. Welcome to episode 6. This is part 1 of our Dimensions of Wellness discussion. We'll go through what we did in the last episode before we start with today's content, which will be the first 3 dimensions of wellness. In episode 5, we discussed a lot of heavy content. We discussed the concept of interoception and learning your body's cues and why that's important. We discussed other hidden senses like proprioception and vestibular senses, and how we can harness them to help us regulate and therefore co-regulate our children. We also talked about some specific sensory strategies using those hidden senses, as well as tying in from episode 4 with labeling your emotions and the power behind that. We also talked about some more practical applications of sensory-based regulation and how you can implement that within your routine. Lastly, we talked about polyvagal theory and how this can be applied to your everyday self-regulation techniques through breath work and stimulating that vagus nerve. There's a lot of intense content, but now we're going to get into today's topics. So last episode was super information heavy, but today we'll be talking more big picture about the different dimensions of wellness and what that might mean for you as a caregiver. Like I said before, this is part 1 of a 2-part discussion. Today's episode will feature discussion around emotional, physical, and social dimensions of wellness. And of course, as always, we will finish today's episode with positive affirmations to send you on your way. So let's get into it, the dimensions of wellness. Let's first define what wellness means. Free of problems, free of stressors, free of illness. Depending on who you are, all of those things may be true, but I prefer this definition of wellness from the World Health Organization. It is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Wellness and being well is so much more than not just being ill. Look at it this way. Say you're healthy physically and exercising 3 to 4 times a week. You're doing well, again, in the physical health realm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that emotionally or socially or even spiritually you're doing well. This differs greatly from our Western medicine definition of wellness and health. It's much more holistic. There are different schools of thought regarding how many different realms or dimensions of wellness that we experience. Some say 6, some say 8, but the point is that wellness is not one-dimensional. It's complex and multifaceted, just like us. The dimensions of wellness we'll be discussing over the next 2 episodes are emotional, physical, social, mental, spiritual, and environmental. As I said in our intro, today's episode will dive into the emotional, physical, and social realms of our dimensions of wellness. But one thing to notice as we discuss the different dimensions is that they don't necessarily exist in these perfect little boxes or in a vacuum. What I mean is that they can bleed over and impact one another quite a bit. Dimensions of wellness don't exist in isolation. For example, if you're significantly short on sleep, then your emotional wellness may be impacted in a different manner than if you were feeling well rested. I know I can certainly be cranky when I'm running low on sleep, and my threshold for high emotions in both myself and in others is certainly lower. So just keep that in mind as we discuss. These are all heavily linked and spill over into one another often. Let's get into some discussion about emotional wellness. This one may seem more self-explanatory, and we've already discussed a lot about emotional regulation and labeling emotions and linking them to interoception, or what's going on inside our body. You've already learned a lot about emotional wellness. The Global Wellness Organization defines emotional wellness as being aware of, accepting, and expressing our feelings and understanding the feelings of others. Being aware of and accepting our feelings might be new territory for a lot of us, but being able to do so strengthens our emotional well-being. This also lends itself to being able to understand and have more grace and empathy to those around us, including our children, spouses, partners, etc. When we're able to understand and accept our difficult feelings, therefore self-regulating, we can either be an outlet for co-regulation or simply a more understanding person. Here's some practical strategies to help strengthen your emotional wellness. Mindfulness and meditation. We've already talked about this quite heavily, so I won't dive into too much here, but making sure to reflect on and be present with yourself in each moment does wonders for your emotional wellness. Self-reflection and self-compassion. You've heard these terms before too. We've talked about them very heavily, especially in episode 3. Having the ability to be compassionate for yourself through the ups and downs of life is also key for emotional wellness. If you can give yourself the grace and the understanding that you can give to your child or to other people in your life, this emotional bucket is going to be so much fuller than being the opposite. Positive affirmations are another great strategy to strengthen emotional wellness. It's why we do them at the end of every episode. Journaling is another great way to strengthen that emotional wellness. It kind of allows you to automatically integrate some of those other components, such as the mindfulness or self-reflection and self-compassion. I want to be conscientious of your time, so I'm not going to reiterate what we've already discussed ad nauseum in some of our other episodes, especially 3, 4, and 5, to gain a better understanding of the evidence behind why these are also important and neurologically beneficial. So with that, we will transition to physical wellness. Again, this might feel more self-explanatory. However, there are certainly some nuances that I want to make sure that I highlight. Yes, physical wellness is certainly being absent or free from illness and disease in a certain sense, but it's also making your physical health a priority too. It is difficult to make the claim that you are physically well and fulfilled when the truth is it's not a priority. And that's to no fault of anybody. As a caregiver, it's only natural, expected even, to put the physical wellness of your child first. However, that doesn't mean you should care any less about your own health or make it not a priority. In some of your cases, this may be important in order for you to keep caring for your child as they grow into adulthood and beyond. For others, this simply means being able to do the things that you need or want to do without excessive fatigue or pain or stress. But physical wellness does not just mean exercise. Nourishing a healthy body through exercise, nutrition, and sleep is the physical wellness definition from the Global Wellness Organization. Sleep and nutrition are so important to maintain physical wellness too, and are not always affiliated or as prevalent in the discussion as exercise and physical fitness. Think holistically. Getting a good night's sleep is crucial for so many complex processes within our body, like emotional regulation and all of the other caregiving tasks when we're awake. A restful night's sleep is imperative to maintaining physical wellness. I'm sure many of you have had nights with little to no sleep at all, and tasks that seem really simple to do on a good night's rest are next to impossible or extremely difficult on little to no sleep. So what are some practical strategies that you can do to ensure a better night's sleep? Of course, this will all depend on your child's needs and your own private circumstances, but here are just some generalized strategies. Blackout curtains, sound machines, or even using an Amazon or Echo while you sleep. Getting to bed earlier. If you find your child's routine takes a really long time to get through, you can move theirs up earlier because you need rest too. There are also some strategies like natural substances to help you sleep. For example, melatonin, magnesium, cherry juice, chamomile tea, warmed milk. Depending on your preferences too, you could also consider looking into CBD oil. According to Harvard University, we need more research, but CBD oil is proving to be a helpful, relatively non-toxic option for managing anxiety, insomnia, and chronic pain. So that's just some natural substances that you could use to help aid sleep. Additionally, taking care to make your working environments separate from your bedroom and sleeping environment. This means trying to avoid looking at important documents or paperwork or stressful activities while in bed. Protect your peaceful slumber, including doom scrolling while in bed. I'm definitely guilty of this, but being intentional about reserving your bed as just a place for sleep and rest can really help your body to initiate a true wind down mode and routine when you're actually in bed. Building a legitimate bedtime routine, though, is probably the most powerful strategy that you can implement. And it's also a more difficult change to make, especially if your bedtime routine is dependent on your child's activity. For the same reason it creates a routine for our kids, though, it's also really helpful for us adults. It gets your body ready for the next thing. Creating a bedtime routine for yourself that is devoid or very limited of screens and includes something restful such as stretching, a prayer, meditation, reading a book, whatever it may be, can really help get you ready for sleep and have a more restful night's slumber. Now, of course, these strategies are not going to work for everybody, especially for those caregivers who find themselves waking up in the middle of the night to attend to their child's needs, or maybe your child is coming into the bedroom to sleep with you. Unfortunately, the tips and strategies that I listed here are not going to be a fix-all for that. But when you are able to get those brief moments of sleep, having a completely dark room or having a sound machine may be able to help the sleep that you do get be deeper, more restful, and more restorative. Let's pivot to looking at nutrition too. This is also a very important aspect of our physical wellness. Food is fuel, and much like the gas in cars, the quality of the fuel makes the engine run more efficiently. So what are some things that you can do? Reprioritize eating or fueling. This is a part of self-care. Skipping breakfast or lunch or both because you or your family is too busy can just hurt you and everybody else in the long run. Lowered blood sugar and being hangry is actually a real thing and not just a joke. When brain glucose drops, and glucose is what comes from food, it's like our energy source, it triggers stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which can cause that anxiety and even aggression and bad moods. And of course, as adults, the aggression piece will not manifest in physical aggression, but we might find our tempers to be much shorter than when we do have a full stomach and are not running on empty. With all of these strategies that we talked about, the goal is always to aim for improvement, not perfection. If you are someone whose meals are maybe more convenient for you than nutrition, that doesn't mean you can't keep enjoying Hot Pockets or any other sort of easy prep food. But perhaps aim to add one fiber-rich or nutrient-dense food into your diet a week, or maybe even just one different food a month. Whatever is the most feasible for you. For example, you can also make switches and substitutions. Instead of instant rice, try quinoa. Those more nutrient-packed protein equates to that higher quality fuel. And when you have that higher quality fuel, everything runs more efficiently. But we're making small changes. Rome wasn't built in a day, and habits take a long time to create. So try things out. If it doesn't work, that's okay. You can stick with it and try to make it a part of your routine more naturally, or you can pivot to something else that's more applicable for your family. Small changes, one step at a time. And again, this podcast, this whole series just serves to be a well for you to lower your bucket into, dump out what you don't need, and keep the rest. Okay, let's pivot to social wellness, our last dimension of wellness for this episode. We've talked about this one in some previous episodes, especially where support groups are concerned, but social wellness expands beyond having positive relationships. Social wellness can be defined as connecting and engaging with others and our communities in meaningful ways. As a caregiver, this may be one of the most difficult spheres to maintain. We have discussed the research that emphasizes the importance of your perception of support and connectedness. However, so remember, your network doesn't necessarily need to be wide, but can just be deep. So what are some practical applications that you can implement within your life to bolster your social wellness? Incorporate social things into your routine, whether on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Try to get coffee with a friend while your partner manages your children for an hour. Or if that's not a practical application, go for a walk with a loved one while your child is there. Maybe it will take a little bit more coordination, but being able to nurture your own social wellness is so important. Maybe instead this means seeking professional social support. There are so many resources available to you just at the Resiliency Center alone. Caregiver coaching is an excellent way to talk with an occupational therapist about how to navigate challenges through the unique lens of a caregiver. Additionally, considering talk therapy with a counselor is also an option that can help you build your toolbox for dismantling your life's distinct challenges. Also involving respite care. Our last episode in this series will walk you through the insurance and necessary criteria behind obtaining respite care and if it's possible for your family, so stay tuned. But for those of you who have foster or adoptive children through the state, you should automatically qualify for respite care, but it's not always an option that's on the forefront of families' minds. So really consider respite care. What respite care does is it provides you with some time just for yourself. Your child will be in the hands of a trained caregiver, and that trained caregiver can be somebody from the state or can also be somebody that you love and know personally that has just undergone the training necessary to provide respite care. But the whole purpose of respite care is to give you some time back to yourself, to nurture yourself. So this is a great potential possibility for you to nurture your social wellness. So now that we've discussed the different dimensions of social, physical, and emotional wellness, we're going to engage in a guided reflection in order to allow you to be able to digest this content more thoroughly and think of how this fits best to your life. So make sure you're in a good space to where you can think on and meditate on some of these prompts. What are some ways you feel like your bucket is full in the emotional dimension of wellness? What are some ways you feel like it might need filling? What are some ways that you feel like your bucket is full in the physical realm? What are some ways that you feel like it needs filling? What are some ways that you feel like your bucket is full in the social realm? What are some ways you feel like it needs filling? What small changes can you make right now to help fill your bucket in any of these areas? Thanks for engaging in that guided reflection. I hope that you're able to think of some of those strategies that we talked about and figure out if any of those strategies can fit into your daily life. I promised at the very beginning of the series that I would never assign homework or quizzes, and that does remain true. I would just encourage you to self-evaluate with where your proverbial bucket is, and then attempt to make one small sustainable change to help fill that bucket. Hopefully, this episode was not as content heavy or overwhelming as the previous episode, but still provides you with some good strategies to take home and put in your pocket and really sit on and think about. We discussed a lot about the emotional, physical, and social wellness dimensions, but we also talked about what it means to be well and what wellness can mean to each person. We will continue our discussion on the dimensions of wellness in our next episode, specifically talking about spiritual, environmental, and mental wellness. But for now, let's turn our attention to our emotional wellness bucket and refill it with some of these positive affirmations. I trust my body's signals and can give it what it needs. I am worthy of health, strength, and vitality. I accept my emotions and cope with the challenges in healthy, nourishing ways. I can manage myself and my stress and find calm and peace in the present moment. I am capable of setting healthy boundaries for others and for myself. I belong and I share my gifts with my family, my community, and myself. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Next episode, episode 7, will be part 2 of our Dimensions of Wellness discussion. Thank you again for listening and have a wonderful rest of your day.